Good afternoon, S3 students, to this second online lecture on public speaking. So, as you know, we are still in part number 1, dealing with the definitions and the meanings of public speaking and the main differences and similarities between public speaking and conversations, interpersonal communication and intrapersonal communication and interpersonal communication. So, as you have seen in the previous online lecture, we have defined what is public speaking, what are the main differences between public speaking and conversations and oral communication. Of course, we have defined public speaking as when the speaker is speaking to large groups or large audience or audiences. Of course, also we have explored the main elements that are associated or interconnected with public speaking, starting from the speaker, the channel, the messages, the ethics and delivery, and the noise. Of course, in this, what you call, also we have shed light on the importance of public speaking in one's private and public or professional life. So, of course, we have stressed the importance and significance of public speaking in one's professional and public life, and how the public speaking can enhance, empower your own social and personal abilities, and how public speaking supports you as a speaker to become more qualified in speaking in public or speaking to large audiences. And in this unit, we are going to discover or to shed light on the significance of culture and public speaking. And in other words, we are going to discover the indispensability of culture within public speaking. So whenever you are practicing public speaking, or you are speaking in public, you are encountering and facing what we call the cultural backgrounds or cultural barriers. So culture and public speaking, we are going to see the main what you call interconnectedness and the main affinities and links and relations between the two. Of course, now we are going to start with a little definition of culture. Of course, it has been stated that culture is the collection of beliefs, attitudes, values, and ways of behaving shared by a group of people and transmitted down from one generation to the next through communication, okay, rather than through gene. Which means now that culture is transmitted from one generation to another through the process of socialization and through the process of enculturation. And of course, culture does not refer to genetic traits such as color, skin, or shape of eyes. Culture does refer to beliefs in some supreme being, to attitude towards family and the values placed on friendship, on money. Of course, now this is a definition, but the definition of culture keeps changing. Okay? That's why we have what you call this definition is frequently changed. Okay, now, when we are talking about culture, culture is not synonymous with race or nationality. Other members of a particular race are often enculturated into a similar set of beliefs, attitudes, and values. And of course, now there is a need to recognize that within any large culture, especially a culture based on race and nationality, there will be enormous differences. Even if there is the same race, people are belonging or affiliating to the same nationality, the same nation or the same race, even though there are what we call existence differences between individuals culturally speaking. Of course, now when we are talking about this culture and public speaking, it's very complex, it's very complicated to face what we call cultural backgrounds or cultural barriers and to overcome them. So this lecture tries to enlighten students with certain mechanisms, certain strategies or tips to overcome and to empower a public speaking speech. It means moving or converting the public speaking speech from local to global or to intercultural speech that takes into account different cultures of the audiences, different cultural backgrounds that the members or the individuals in the audience or audiences have. So in a similar way, gender can be considered as a culture very largely because culture teaches boys and girls different attitudes, beliefs, values, and ways of communicating and relating to one another. Of course, the audience, there are some gender differences, males, females, men, women, old men, and young ones. That's why the speaker in public speaking has to take into account these differences concerning the gender and age. So in addition, we are living a time of great gender changes. So many men, for example, are doing a great deal more in caring for their children, and the concept, if not the term husband is becoming increasingly common and perhaps a little less negative. So more obvious perhaps is that many women are becoming much more visible in the field once occupied exclusively by men: politics, in law enforcement, the military, and the clergy. Which means now what we call the culture keeps changing, and now to call people or different individuals are transgressing different rules that have been assigned before by culture. Yeah, so now people are living in a time when individuals have become increasingly sensitive to the importance of cultural differences. And of course, these cultural differences are so crucial in public speaking. So for the speaker to make his own or her own speech very qualitative and very intercultural, of course, respecting the differences, and respecting the religious and cultural political affiliation of the audience or the member of the audience, the speaker has pleased to take into consideration the cultural differences and how the audience members are automatically sensitive and responsive to these cultural differences. So do not speak from one what you call native cultural background or from one unique cultural vision. So the speaker please has to modify and empower his own speech or his own talk by adding what we call intercultural competencies and intercultural qualities to his or her own speech. So people should leave their native culture behind and adapt to the new culture. So when you are speaking, in public or giving your own oral speech to the audience, the speaker has ultimately take into account please the following requirements. The audience or the members of the audiences have different backgrounds, a different cultural background, different religious affiliation, and automatically you should not speak from one perception or from one perspective or from one political or religious perspective, which means now you need to modify as much as possible your own speech to make it more global and more intercultural to avoid what you call these differences. Yeah. So now one of the important elements in this part is that how we can overcome and eradicate cultural barriers and cultural problems or cultural troubles that may be generated from speaking in public and speaking to different audiences that are all totally and completely different culturally, religiously, and politically speaking. So the best aim here, the best objective is that the use of cultural perspective. So you are going to prepare and plan your own speech before delivering orally your own speech within the right context and the right environment. Of course, you have to plan and prepare it before, take into account please the cultural perspective. So we are going to see now the importance and the efficaciousness of this cultural perspective within oral lecture and public speaking lectures. So now the principles of communicating information and for persuasion differ from one culture to another. And of course we know basically the main aims and the main objectives of public speaking. So we speak in public for many different reasons and many different objectives, starting from persuading, informing, entertaining people and persuading them, informing them, or speaking in specific occasions. So there are different aims and different objectives for speaking in public. So if you are to understand the public speaking, then you need to know how its principles vary on the basis of culture. But public speaking occurs when you are practicing your public speaking or speaking in public. Please, you have to take into account there are different cultural principles, and these cultural principles or attitudes vary and differ from one cultural environment to another. So success in public speaking, as on your job and on your social life, will depend on great part on your understanding of and your ability to communicate effectively with the person who may have different cultural perspective. So of course you need to take into consideration please these cultural differences, and you have to understand the differences rather than encountering or making what you you call the cultural shock. So instead of encountering fighting or struggle, or what you call fighting with the others and struggling to persuade them with your own unique and native perceptions, you have to understand and look for similarities instead of enlightening the differences between your culture and the audience, the culture. So automatically public speaking has what you call a great impact, a great influence, okay, on personal life and personal, professional and public life. That's why please, when you are trying to practice public speaking, please take into consideration the following, what you call the cultural paradigms and the cultural principles that your speech will be based on. Yeah, so now the aim of a cultural perspective and how we can apply, how we can applicate this cultural perspective within the oral speeches and public speeches. So the aim of a cultural perspective, of course, there are different what you call elements, different tactics and different strategies that the theorists have mentioned and have stated before concerning how to overcome what you call the stage fright and how to be confident and how to face and encounter the audience in a very self-confident manner, in a very persuasive, a very attractive and very influential way. But the problem now, we are trying to explain briefly and concisely how to apply the cultural perspective when you are practicing, you are delivering your own speech in public. So let's start with the cultural perspective. So a cultural perspective means it's another aim to show that the principles of public speaking are specific to a given culture. What proves effective and ethical in one culture might prove ineffective and unethical in another. So there are different cultures, and culture, as we have seen before, is a collection of attitudes, values and norms, and especially vision. Each culture has its own vision concerning the ethics and concerning the what you call the moralities. So each culture has its own system of moralities. And to take this into account, please, what is effective for this culture, it's ineffective. What is moral for this culture, it's immoral for this one. What is ethical for this culture, it's unethical for this. So there are differences, even the differences are taken from cultural background or taken from religious sources or from political sources or from social sources. So there are different cultural principles and different ethics and different what you call systems concerning the moralities. So the cultural differences should not blind the speaker to the great number of similarities that are existing in even the most widely separated culture. So within cultures, within different cultures, of course, they are really called different cultures, and culture are automatically not identical with each other. Of course, there are different values, different attitudes, different perceptions, different conceptions, but the public speaker has to enlighten and has to enliven to make his own or her own speech very striking, very attractive, very influential, of course, stressing the similarities rather than highlighting the differences. So when you are talking to an audience that contains different cultural background, different cultural and religious backgrounds, the speaker or the public speaking has to highlight and focus on similarity rather than differences. So instead of talking about what we call native local culture as the best one or something like the best, automatically the speaker, in order to enliven his own speech to make it more vivid and more relevant and more qualitative in a very qualified manner, the speaker has to announce the similarities to make his own or her own speech very global, respecting the intercultural communication. So the speech should act like a bridge between the different cultures. And of course, observing the different culture, listening to the difference and making the culture very homogeneous, reducing the differences and increasing the similarities are key points in the cultural perspective to public speaking. So the three pillars of cultural perspective in public speaking are the following. So the first one is that the speaker has to make what you call a homogeneous speech. Homogeneous speech means which tries automatically to unify and bridge the gap between different cultures and reducing the differences or insimilarities similarities between different cultures, and also stressing what you call increasing the similarities. So when you are talking your own topic or supporting arguments or supporting evidence or the sound evidence that you are trying to support your own thesis, take into account that when you are talking, most of the time you are talking about a specific topic, a very direct and specific topic, and this topic is supported and empowered by supporting arguments. So within your own supporting arguments or supporting factual materials, the speaker has to follow and stress what you call the similarities and the common points, okay, the common points between different culture. Okay, that's what I want to stress here. So this is the main elements of public speaking, and of course in this online lecture I have briefly concentrated on the uses of cultural perspective to make your own speech very cultural, very intercultural, of course transcending or overcoming the main differences, and sometimes the differences can cause and can generate misunderstanding between different cultures and different what you call cultural systems. So here, briefly speaking, just to state briefly some of the most important and significant points that I have highlighted in this online brief lecture concerning now the uses of this cultural perspective. So whenever we are engaged in public speaking means speaking to a large audience, and audience, or sometimes audiences, mean different affiliations and different belonging. So to overcome the potential misunderstanding between different cultures, the speaker has to what you call to contextualize and has to convert his own oral speech into a universal one, a very intercultural one or a global one, which means of course neglecting what you call the specificities of his own native or her own native culture, and talking, highlighting the main cultural common points between human beings and between nations and between different people who are culturally, religiously and politically different. This is what you call the main thing that the students have to concentrate in this part, because we are still in part number 1, and in this part 1 is directed, as you have seen in the book that I have assigned to you. So in this part the writer starts with defining public speaking and mentioning the importance of public speaking, and then highlighting the main elements of public speaking and how these elements are extremely and eventually interconnected with each other, and then moving to the importance of cultural perspective within the public speaking, and how this cultural perspective can be so effective and so practical and so influential in determining the quality and determining the success of your own global speech. So the students now, they are talking about these public speaking elements and how to empower and make the public speaking more global and more international and more intercultural. Of course, take into account that they have to use this cultural perspective. Cultural perspective is based on stressing the similarities and neglecting the main differences or insimilarities that exist between two different cultures. And thank you.